They told you poverty food was just bland porridge and stale bread, but they never told you about the Umble pie that turned deer organs into feasts. Some of these recipes were guarded fiercely without written instructions because for generations, working families weren't just cooking, they were turning literal garbage into gold. These meals are living pieces of British survival history, resourceful, ingenious, and hidden from modern society. And once you see what they could create from nothing, you'll wonder why no one taught you these techniques when times get tough. Number 1. Umble pie was where this survival cooking truly shone. Now, umbles weren't some fancy ingredient, they were deer heart, liver, and kidneys. The wealthy folks got the prime cuts, but the poor? They got creative with what others threw away. Your great-grandmother would chop these organs fine, mix them with whatever vegetables she could find, wrap it all in pastry made from the cheapest flour, and create something that could feed 6 people for the cost of feeding 1 today. That's not just cooking, that's alchemy. But here's what gets me excited about this. Every single one of these meals tells a story of human creativity under pressure. Number 2. Muggety pie took this concept even further. Picture this. Leftover scraps of meat, some questionable vegetables, maybe a bit of fat if you were lucky, all baked together until it resembled something your family would actually want to eat. The name itself comes from mugget, meaning stomach or entrails. Not exactly appetizing by today's standards, but when you're genuinely hungry, taste becomes secondary to survival. That brings us to something most people don't realize about poverty cooking. Liquids were everything. When solid food was scarce, our grandparents became masters of making something from almost nothing. Number 3. Saloop. Now here's a drink that literally kept people alive during London's coldest winters. Made from sassafras root or orchid tubers, this hot, thick beverage was sold by street vendors for pennies. Think of it as the great-grandfather of your morning coffee, except instead of giving you a caffeine buzz, it provided actual nutrition when there wasn't much else available. Street vendors would shout, "Saloop! Hot Saloop!" through the foggy London streets, and working folks would line up with their cups, knowing this might be their only warm meal of the day. Number 4. Brose was Scotland's answer to liquid survival. Oatmeal mixed with hot water or broth. Sounds simple, right? But here's the genius part. It could be made with literally anything liquid you had on hand. Milk if you were having a good week, meat broth if you'd managed to save some bones, even just hot salted water if that's all there was. One bowl of Brose could keep a working man going for 12 hours in the fields, and it cost almost nothing to make. This is where our ancestors' resourcefulness really shows. They understood something we've forgotten today. Number 5. Slinks were calves that died shortly after birth. Instead of wasting the meat, they'd turn it into a stew that could feed a family for days. Harsh reality? Absolutely. But when you're choosing between feeding your children or following modern food sensibilities, our great-grandparents chose their children every single time. Now here's where things get really interesting. Our coastal communities developed their own survival cuisine that would shock most people today. Number 6. Water-souchy was essentially fish poached in its own juices with herbs. But this wasn't some fancy restaurant dish. This was what fishermen's wives made when the catch was small and money was tight. They'd take whatever fish couldn't be sold at market, usually because it was too small or slightly past its prime, poach it gently with whatever herbs grew wild nearby, and create a meal that was both nutritious and surprisingly flavorful. The name literally means something boiled in water. No fancy techniques, just pure survival cooking. Number 7. Broxy. Now this one might make you uncomfortable, but stick with me because there's an important lesson here. Broxy was sheep that had died naturally, often from disease. Instead of letting the meat go to waste, rural communities would salt it heavily and turn it into a preserved meat that could last for months. Was it risky? Probably. But when the alternative was starvation, Our ancestors made calculated risks that kept them alive through the harshest winters Scotland had ever seen. That's the thing about survival cooking. It wasn't about what was ideal, it was about what was possible. Number 8. Skirlie proved this beautifully. Oatmeal fried with onions and whatever fat was available. Sounds simple, but this dish could stretch a tiny bit of protein into a filling meal for an entire family. Scottish mothers would make huge batches, and it would serve as breakfast, lunch, and dinner when times were particularly tough. Number 9. Panackelty from the northeast of England was exactly this kind of miracle. Layers of potatoes, onions, and whatever meat scraps were available, all slow cooked together until everything melted into something greater than the sum of its parts. The beauty was in its flexibility. No two Panackelty dishes were ever exactly the same because they were made from whatever was on hand. Having a good week, maybe some bacon. Tough times, just vegetables and hope. Number 10. White Pot took this concept in a sweet direction. Milk, eggs, sugar, and stale bread baked together into something that felt like dessert, but was actually a clever way to use up ingredients that were about to go bad. Your great-grandmother wasn't making this because she wanted dessert. She was making it because she refused to let anything edible go to waste. But here's what really gets me about these dishes. They weren't just about survival. They were about dignity. Number 11. Skilly, which was basically just thin gruel, was what they served in workhouses and prisons. It was deliberately unappetizing, designed to discourage people from seeking help. But home cooks found ways to make even gruel taste like something worth eating, adding herbs, a tiny bit of fat, anything to maintain some sense of pride in what they were serving their families. Number 12. Stargazy pie from Cornwall is probably the most famous example. Pilchards, baked in pastry, with their heads poking through the crust, looking up at the stars. Sounds whimsical until you realize this was created during a time when those fish heads weren't decorative. They were proof that the fish was fresh and the oil from the heads was too valuable to waste. Every part of that fish was used. Nothing was discarded, and somehow they made it into something that looked almost magical. Number 13. Jellied eels from London's East End weren't just food, they were community. Eel and pie shops became gathering places where working families could get a hot, nutritious meal for pennies. The eels were cooked in their own gelatin, creating a protein-rich dish that would keep people full for hours. Not pretty to look at, but absolutely essential for keeping dock workers and factory employees fed and working. That's what I love about this next one. Number 14. Pease pottage was literally the ancestor of split pea soup, but it was so much more than that. This thick porridge made from dried peas could be stretched to feed as many people as necessary, and it improved with age. Families would keep a pot going for days, adding whatever scraps they had, creating a constantly evolving meal that never quite tasted the same twice, but always satisfied hunger. Number 15. Faggots. These weren't just meatballs, they were edible proof of complete resourcefulness. Pork liver, heart, lungs, mixed with breadcrumbs and herbs, wrapped in caul fat and baked until golden. Every single part of the pig that couldn't be sold as premium cuts was transformed into something that was actually more flavorful than many of the expensive cuts we prefer today. Your great-grandmother knew that organ meat was more nutritious than muscle meat. She was doing nose-to-tail eating decades before it became trendy. Number 16. Calf's head. Now this one requires some explanation because I know what you're thinking. But imagine this. A whole calf's head could feed a family of 8 for 2 days. The brain, tongue, cheeks, every part was used. They'd boil it until tender, then serve different parts over several meals. The tongue became a delicacy. The brain was scrambled with eggs. The cheeks were so tender they fell apart at the touch of a fork. One purchase, multiple meals, maximum nutrition. Number 17. Crowdie from Scotland was their version of cottage cheese, but made in the simplest way possible. Sour milk heated gently until it's separated, then strained through cloth. No fancy equipment, no special ingredients, just milk that was past its prime, transformed into protein that could last for weeks. They'd eat it with oatcakes, mix it with herbs, use it in cooking. One batch could provide protein for days. Number 18. Mock turtle soup was brilliant psychological cooking. Real turtle soup was for the wealthy, but clever cooks discovered that calf's head cooked properly could taste remarkably similar. They'd add the right herbs, cook it long enough to develop that rich, complex flavor, and create something that felt luxurious even when it was made from the cheapest ingredients available. It wasn't about deception. It was about creating the experience of abundance when resources were scarce. Number 19. Brown Windsor soup became so iconic it was served everywhere from workhouses to railway stations. Beef bones simmered for hours with vegetables and herbs created a rich, dark broth that was both filling and economical. The secret was time. Poor families had more time than money, so they'd let these soups simmer all day, developing flavors that expensive restaurants couldn't replicate. Number 20. Bread and dripping wasn't technically soup, but it was the liquid fat from roasted meat spread on bread that would otherwise be too stale to eat. That dripping contained concentrated flavor and calories that could make the difference between a satisfying meal and going hungry. Children would come running when they heard bread and drippings ready, because they knew they were getting something that tasted like Sunday roast, even if it was just the leftover fat. Number 21. Bubble-and-squeak was Monday's answer to Sunday's leftovers. Cabbage and potatoes fried together until they literally bubbled and squeaked in the pan. But this wasn't just leftover management, this was flavor transformation. Those vegetables, cooked again with whatever fat was available, developed a crispy exterior and creamy interior that was completely different from their original form. One dish that could use up everything left from the weekend and still taste like something you'd choose to eat. Number 22. Bone broth was the foundation of everything. When there was no money for meat, there were still bones available from the butcher for pennies. These bones simmered for hours, released gelatin, minerals, and flavor that became the base for dozens of other dishes. A good pot of bone broth could stretch a handful of vegetables into a week's worth of meals. Modern health enthusiasts pay premium prices for what our great-grandparents made from scraps. Number 23. Haggerty from Northumberland was layers of sliced potatoes and onions cooked in a single pan until the bottom was crispy and the top was golden. No meat necessary, but the slow cooking developed such complex flavors that it felt like a complete meal. Families would gather around the table and eat directly from the pan, everyone getting their share of the crispy bits and the tender middle. Number 24. Mug was basically Muggety pie, but even simpler, offal baked in a mug or small pot with whatever vegetables were available. One dish, one pot, minimal cleanup, maximum nutrition. When fuel for cooking was expensive, efficiency mattered as much as flavor. These individual portions meant everyone got their fair share, and nothing was wasted in serving. Number 25. Nettle soup and foraged greens. This is where our ancestors really showed their connection to the land. Stinging nettles, dandelion greens, wild garlic, sorrel, all growing free in fields and hedgerows. Your great-grandmother knew exactly when and where to find these plants, how to prepare them safely, and how to combine them into soups that provided vitamins and minerals that would have been impossible to afford any other way. This wasn't just cooking, this was botanical knowledge passed down through generations, keeping families healthy when purchased vegetables weren't an option. Your ancestors survived on nothing but ingenuity. They turned garbage into gold while we panic over empty shelves. Hit subscribe for next week's video on forbidden food preservation secrets, and tell me in the comments which dish shocked you most.